Good morning. My name's Randy Boe, and as Pastor Kidd mentioned, I'm here to talk a little bit about what we saw and did in El Salvador last week. So a few months ago, Pastor Kidd approached me and found me in a weak moment and asked if I'd be willing to go to El Salvador to observe the presidential elections, and I said yes. So we left last Thursday, flew to San Salvador, and we were hosted by Lionel Cruz, who some of you may know, who lives in San Salvador. We were there under the auspices of a group called FECLI, which is a loose confederation of Protestant churches in Central America. And FECLI accounted, I think, for the largest single group of election observers that were present in the country. During the course of the next few days, we were able to go to a candidates forum where the vice presidential candidates from each of the main parties addressed us. And it was amazing. We walked in with no credentials, no identification, and sat 20 feet away and were able to get a real sense for what the election was about. We went through training with other observers, and then the three of us, Lionel, Pastor Kidd, and I struck out for Lionel's home in rural El Salvador, where we were going to observe the elections. I'm sure most of you remember that El Salvador suffered through a horrific civil war from 1980 to 1992. And the reminders of that war are all around. When you go and see the cathedral in central San Salvador, the side of the building is still pockmarked with bullets. The war is very much alive in the hearts and memories of most El Salvadorans, and it's, I think, very difficult to find a family that was not touched in one way or another by that civil war. The Civil War ended in 1992 with a peace accord, and they began a process of instituting democratic elections beginning in 1994. This election was for the president and vice president. There were three main parties, the FMLN, who were the rebels during the Civil War, the Arena Party, which is the more conservative party, who were implicated, for example, in the murder of Archbishop Romero in 1980, and then a splinter group, the Unidad Party. We lived for a couple of days in rural El Salvador in the San Miguel district with an active volcano as the backdrop. And it was a very moving experience, seeing the way regular El Salvadorans live their life, the simplicity, the creature comforts that we all take for granted that simply don't exist for most of them. And then we were there for the elections, and we visited 4 different voting stations in rural El Salvador and observed. And our charge was simply observe and report, make sure that the process that was laid down by El Salvadoran law was followed, make sure that things were fair, things were done correctly. And so that's what we did. And it was an astonishing experience, seeing people who live this simply conduct national elections in an efficient, organized, really well-run way was amazing. But when we pulled up at the first voting station, which was a tiny school in a town called Santa Clara, there was an ox cart. Someone had come to the election in an ox cart. All day long, we saw truckloads of people standing in the beds of pickup trucks and larger trucks being driven to voting stations. People showed up with families, they voted, it was peaceful, it was cohesive, and it worked. And I think part of the reason that it works is the commitment that the rest of the world has made towards providing international observers. We were greeted pretty warmly everywhere we went. I think people were happy to have someone come in and watch the process and see what they did and help ensure that it was fair and neutral for all the different candidates. We saw a lot of young people who were in charge of actually running the nuts and bolts of the elections. And even though they represented different parties, and even though those parties have a very, very difficult past that's not so far in the past, they worked together. It was obvious that they were friendly with each other, that they respected each other. And that was very, very important to see. At the end of the day, we went back to the first polling station that we had visited to watch the ballots. And the ballots, the voting process, involved a piece of paper with the logos of the different parties And once they verified that you were eligible to vote, you got a piece of paper and a marker, and you drew an X through the logo of the party you wanted to, folded it up, and put it in a cardboard box. At the end of the day, they closed the polls, and people gathered around, and they counted the ballots by hand, one at a time. And as we were doing that, and it was dark, outside the fence of the school where we were, there were 70 or 80 people gathered, waiting to find out the results. Not from the national elections, because they really had no way of finding that out, but the results at their own polling station, which I thought was very moving and showed a real commitment to the process and to the idea of reconciling with the past and moving forward in a fair and democratic way. So that's what we did. And I have to say it was incredibly educational, incredibly enriching and rewarding, none of which I expected when I went. So let me talk a little bit about the qualifications. If I can do it, basically there's no one who's disqualified. I don't speak Spanish. I came to understand a little bit by the end, but that's not a requirement. Really, all you have to be able to do is travel. As Pastor Kidd mentioned, we have kind of a hospitality network in place, so there are places to stay and people to take you around. We traveled all over El Salvador, in San Salvador, in the rural areas. I had made the mistake of reading the State Department advisories before I left, and we violated every single one of the rules that they set out. We drove outside of the capital, we drove at night, we drove off the main roads. There was never a moment when we felt unsafe or threatened in any way, so you would be in good hands. As Pastor Kidd mentioned, the next set of elections are March 8th. I think in this last round they had nearly 1,000 international observers arranged, and it's plain to see that it'll be very difficult on such short notice to arrange for that many observers again. People who were there this last week, most of them are not going to be able to return, and there's not a lot of time. So there is a real need for observers, and if it's something you'd like to do, and if you're interested in having a fantastic, educational, enriching, rewarding experience, I can't say enough about it. And it's not all work. We managed to sneak in a pastoral visit to the beach. We did a lot of sightseeing. It was really a great time, and I can't say enough about it. So if you're interested, Pastor Kidd, of course, has all the details. I'm happy to talk about it with you as well. Thanks very much.